Philip Hoare. He's been, I think, we'd say a longtime friend, maybe 10 to 15 years I've known Philip. First introduced himself to our projects here at the center with one of his passions. Philip, of course, is not just passionate about whales, but those of you who are in town know he's an extraordinary observer of the natural world, and he has generated a number of wonderful essays and books that reflect his insights. And so we're in a great position to hear from him today. Philip, of course, is known for his really very widely regarded book on Moby Dick called Leviathan the Whale. I always think of it as the whale, and most of us do. In All Things Considered on NPR, they said of the whale is probably one of the most sublime reading experiences you'll ever have, and it is really a wonderful piece of work. I've never really had any opportunity to research you, Philip, so this gave me a chance to upgrade my knowledge a little bit. Where else but in Wikipedia? That's where everything is. And of course, because I have to introduce him, I had to check up on him. Only a couple of things. One, I find out that he's the author of a biography of Noel Coward in 1995. And then a whole long list of other books, not just the whale stuff, which I think is a testament to his breadth of knowledge and his capacity to observe. Philip was awarded an honorary doctorate at the Marine Institute of Plymouth University. So he's asking that all of us call him Dr. Hoare from now on. Is that right? No, that's not right. And he is a professor of creative writing at Southampton University. Knowing Philip as I do, I want you to notice that he will not tell us, but as always, he'll think with us. Tonight on the artist Albrecht Dürer. Philip.
Thanks very much, Stormy, and it's really emotional to be here after 4 years. It's 4 years since I've been in Provincetown. Been coming here for nearly 30 years now, in fact, and so it's really wonderful to be back here and see such a lovely crowd in this amazing building. Yeah, German artist Albrecht Dürer, who is staring at you now with his hypnotic eyes, a man who was born in medieval period and died in the modern period. It's like a Janus god looking back to a period when dragons existed until when they did not. And what for me is extraordinary about these eyes is the way they saw the world, the natural world especially, but the human world too. So he was born in Nuremberg in 1471. And Nuremberg at that point was the Silicon Valley of Europe. It was the epicenter of a whole new emerging series of technologies, the most important of which was printing. There are 100 printing presses in Nuremberg. They were printing the first accounts of the Far East, of the first published accounts of Marco Polo's journeys to China, but also Hernando Cortez's accounts of the New World, which was rapidly being denuded of its gold, which was coming over to the Holy Roman Empire, the crown jewels of which are held in this castle here. So this city, Nuremberg, which is pretty much epicentral to the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, becomes this kind of point of energy at which Dürer operates. And he operates from this house, which is sort of clamped like a limpet at the top of the hill in the lee of the castle. There's something very weird and organic about the house. When I was researching my book, I went there on the 21st of May, 2019, which was his 500th anniversary, nearly 500th anniversary of his birthday. It's his birthday. And I went up to the front door and knocked on the door. It's a museum now. and I was the first person there. I'm waiting for the door to open, and they opened the door. I said, "It's his birthday." I thought they were bound to let me in free. And the house is an amazing thing in and itself because of it being a kind of expression of Dürer as a modern personality. He's the first artist to be individually identified as an artist in his own right. And we'll see that in a minute through his art. But the building is kind of like, it's like an armadillo almost. And it's a kind of laboratory. There's something quite magical. It's think out of Grimm's fairy tales in a way. And there's this balcony which he built to observe the stars. He believed in both astrology and astronomy at the same time, which is quite typical of people of that age, moving into a scientific world, but still believing in superstition. All his life he felt governed by the planet Saturn, which is the melancholy planet. And he would observe the stars from his balcony. And it was here this house became a kind of factory of his art. And what's really important to understand about Dürer is that no artist before this time had actually printed their own work. So he was the first person to print his own work and disseminate it throughout Europe. He was the Andy Warhol of the Middle Ages in a way, because he was using his studio to create these images which could take his art across a whole empire. And if you imagine at this period in time, an ordinary human person would be exposed to very few anthropogenic images created by another human being. So they wouldn't see in an entire lifetime as many images as you saw in a minute on your phone. So suddenly Dürer, using the new medium of printing, which Martin Luther says is going to drive men mad, it's going to drive their souls insane. So it's very analogous to the internet. It's very analogous to lots of things. It's analogous to people saying if you ride the railways, your organs will fly out of your mouth or something. He uses this amazing new technology to create a series of images in 1497 of the apocalypse, the book of Revelations in the Bible. So he imagines what people think is just about to happen, because it's coming up to 1500. It's a doom-laden time. People are building towers to escape the coming flood. Nuremberg is under lockdown from the plague. Everyone who can afford to is fleeing the city in their helicopters. They're flying to the Low Countries to escape the plague in Nuremberg. And Dürer is not only imagining it, he's recreating it. So suddenly he gives you an image of what's to come. And it's like a CGI piece of science fiction. If you imagine that the only images you've seen have been in church, on paintings in church, maybe stained glass, maybe in an illuminated manuscript, very rarely seen that. Suddenly, you can buy these images and you can paste them on the wardrobe door. He actually issues instructions to colour them in. You can colour them in. So it's an incredibly modern thing. And it's for that reason that one of Dürer's images, which I'll tell you later, the small slide I don't know if it is, ended up in Colombia at the end of this century. So it's that sort of sense of absolute technological, artistic leap that this man is in control of. And that's what happened when, in the year 2006, I was in Boston. It was a really rainy, snowing, and to sort of get in out of the cold, I went to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and walked into this classical white cube of a room, right, sort of antiseptic room in it. And around the walls were these images by Dürer. And I was completely blown away. because they looked as though they'd just been run off the office photocopier. I couldn't believe they're 500 years old. They're almost anime, like manga cartoons. These four horsemen of the apocalypse riding roughshod coats over the sort of the sinners and the rotting flesh of dead horses and angels, which are actually flying in the air. It's like you can't not believe in them. And what especially struck me when I looked at this series, it was a series of images of prints, woodcuts, and engravings by Dürer, was the way he portrayed the natural world in an almost photographically real way. The humans look pretty convincing, but the animals too. The cats, the ox, the parrots, there's a goat up on top of the cliff. You get a real sense of someone who's really interested in the natural world. And although this is a biblical scene, these animals start to carry a sort of non-allegorical, non-religious significance. They are being drawn for their own sake as species. Yes, Liz?
Where would Durer have encountered parrots?
He's widely traveling, and in Antwerp and in Brussels, a lot of stuff was coming in from India, from South America. So parrots were arriving there, and other animals, as we will get to. We think it had something to do with an affair he was having with a prince at that point. So without having to go into that whole story, it's a lot of symbolism, which is personal symbolism in Durer's work. So I started looking, the reason why I was really caught up with this, because I knew this story, this legend about Dürer. This is why this was really interesting at this point, because I was as Stormy said, deep in my whale-headed messianic phase there. I was in Provincetown. I was on the whale watch boats. I wouldn't get off the whale watch boat. I was go out 3 trips in succession. I was bothering all the people here at the centre. I was bothering Stormy. We'll be bothering you as well, Liz. And I was really fascinated with this story that Durer's great ambition was to draw a whale. And I started to see an obsessiveness in this artist, which was analogous to me in my head to Moby Dick. The obsessiveness with which Melville tries to record his experience and all the kind of permutations of whales and whaling and of the human reaction to the natural world. And it really seemed to me very directly related, because Melville writes, in many ways, Melville writes some of the great first fictional natural history of the 19th century, of the modern world. His accounts of whales are kind of metaphysical, but they're also real. And that's what I saw Dürer doing, something quite magical. And I know that Dürer, when he went off from Nuremberg in 1520 to the Low Countries, to what we call the Netherlands now, which were part of the Holy Roman Empire, he'd heard about a stranded whale on the coast of Zeeland, which was and still is a kind of weird half land, half water terrain, a marshy, inundated place. And he'd gone there during the lockdown in Nuremberg with a load of friends, very wealthy merchant princes, people who could afford to flee the plague, rather as everyone came here during lockdown, and trying to get to see this whale. I'll pick that up again in a minute. But as I started to investigate, I found that I really became very interested in the personality of someone who could create something so modern 500 years ago. And so I started following him, stalking him, actually, across Europe, because I'd spent a lot of my book writing life in America, and my past 3 books have been really focused, Rise and Tide Falling Star is a kind of love letter to Provincetown, a Leviathan or the Whale is really similar. But I really felt, especially because of what happened in Britain, in our relationship to European culture, at the same time as the referendum where we left the EU, And I just felt this was kind of a murderous act being inflicted on culture as well as many other aspects of British life. But so I went to Europe in a sort of deliberate attempt to talk about the importance of art, really, because no one was making the case for the importance of art that I felt at that time. And so Dürer became a way of talking about that. And so I was able to go before lockdowns to pretty much everywhere which held Dürer's work. So the Prada in Madrid, Albertina in Vienna, Altpinakothek in Munich, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, British Museum in London, meeting Dürer. Because the thing is, when you come into contact with Dürer, especially with his paintings, you realise that is genetically him. So when you see a painting by Dürer, there's his hair and his spit and those pieces of work. And then what really astounded me is when I started to see his self-portraits. And I realized the series of self-portraits that he makes of himself are a kind of natural history of himself. And that this sequence, which is really astonishing, because there is no way Dürer would have ever been able to sell any one of those pictures, is an act of extraordinary hubris and vanity for an artist to paint a picture of themselves. Now, that maybe he is advertising his wares, he's showing off his technique, but I believe these images go far, far further than that. So the image one, he's a young man. He's got out of bed. His earbuds are still tangled in his curls. He's wearing a jellyfish on top of his head. He's insouciantly dressed in a kind of stop looking at me way. It's kind of that pose. It's very teenage. I mean, he's a bit young. He's in his early 20s now. But it's a really arresting image of a young man sort of challenging himself and the viewer. And it has all sorts of odd aspects to it, especially the strange sprig of Eryngium, it's a sea holly, which we still don't know what that means as a symbol. It does seem to point his little finger, which is bent round. He had a strange condition of his fingers called Dupuytren's contracture, which makes your fingers bend round into like a claw. I have it. My birthday is the day before Dürer's birthday. This is one of the reasons I started listening. But in this image, you see the sea holly almost piercing his hand. So it might be a reference to a crucified Christ. But there's something much more enigmatic going on. And when you see the next image, the next self-portrait that he paints, he's just back from Italy. So he's learnt to dance, he's learnt to fence, he's wearing Versace, he's been on the Casa Giata, and he's on the train coming back from Florence back to Nuremberg. You can see the view out of the train window. And he is dressed to the nines. This cape held across very sort of sensual way across his shoulders. He's proving that he is an artist. He's not an artisan. He's not a worker. And how do we know that? Because his hands are covered in kid leather gloves. So this, as much as he looks beautiful, we are drawn to his gaze, we're also drawn to his hand as well. And this sort of black and white look, it's really austere, it's really elegant. And his hair is just crazy. People back in Nuremberg joke that he spends hours with his boy, as they call him, curling and oiling his hair. But then there's something really strange. A whole chunk of his hair he cut out. Why? What's that about? Was it given to a lover? Or is it a kind of indication of the imperfection of art in the way that Herman Melville's Billy Budd speaks with a speech impediment? He's this golden sailor, but his flaw is that he speaks with a speech impediment. So there's always a flaw in art. And the fact that the landscape is very realistically being portrayed. Dürer's painting some of the first real landscapes for their own sake. Again, this sense of the natural world, his relationship to the natural world. And then the last of those portraits, and the last portrait, which is painted in 1500, so dead at the point of the millennium. He's halfway through his life. He's 28. At 28 is the acme of your life in this period. That's when you are at your most powerful. That's everything's downhill from then onwards. So I'm sorry, most of the people in this room, but so at this point he turns to face us, and obviously he's Christ. He's elongated his face to look like Christ. His hair is arranged in a sort of a Jewish way, imitating sort of what he would assume to be like a Semitic person of that time, of Christ's time. But he's wearing a very lavish fur coat. But the lavish fur coat is also shaved away. You can't quite see it because it's a bit bright light, but it's shaved away and attached there. Again, a kind of flaw in the perfection. But what's really stunning about this image is that he's creating his own monogram. So Dürer's monogram is the A with the D in it. So his hair is the A and his fingers form the D. So he has become, rather like Warhol, he has become his own artwork, his own art object. It's the most extraordinary piece of self-promotion. The caption says, "I, Albrecht Dürer, have painted myself in fast paint." He's meaning paint that will last. And he's like this Janus god. He's looking backwards and looking forwards. And it's a really extraordinary image to paint. And as I say, as the artists in this room will tell you, that is a really expensive thing to do in time and in materials. I mean, paint is really expensive. Why is he doing it? And why is he doing something like this? This is one of his nature studies. It's in the Albertina Gallery in Vienna. It's kept 3 floors down in a nuclear-proof bunker. It's the most extraordinary watercolor, life-size study of a clump of earth. A clump of earth. He's taken his long-suffering manservant out beyond the castle walls in Nuremberg and told him to dig up a clod of earth, and they bring it back and plonk it in the studio, and Dürer obsessively paints it in every fine detail. And what he does in this image, again, I mean, it could be a study for a painting. It could be a study for the foliage around Adam and Eve's feet, but it transcends that. It's something absolutely, it's so modern, I mean, it could be, a Victorian naturalist making an accurate field study of those specimens of plants, or it could be a modern artist, creating exactly the same image. It's a piece of stilled time. Those daffodils, those dandelions are at the point where they're just about to burst with those great fluffy clocks, which will fly away. So it's a peak of summer. There's a sense that he's taken a microcosmic slice of a nondescript piece of the earth to create a kind of macrocosmic image of the world. There's something very Japanese about it as well. If you look at the bottom of the base of the picture, he's actually painted the roots of the plants. The roots, you can see it even more clearly here. Incredible detail. And this is life size, so you can imagine it's about that big. It's just astonishing. It reminds me of that thing that when you're a kid and you're lying on the summer lawn and you're peering through the grass, really, really close up, and you're looking at the beetles and the worms. They look like some sort of jungle, in your eyes. That sense of absolute fascination, undiluted, childlike fascination with the natural world. There's the second image, which was bought out of the archives for me, and these are not on public display, these images. They don't leave the Albertini. they're only put on display every 10 years because they're so light sensitive, because being watercolors. Was this, and as this came out of the box, I could hear it scrabbling, and it was pulled up by its ears and plonked on the table in front of me. Another life-size image of a hare. One of Dürer's most famous images. Again, it's completely arbitrary in many ways. It's crouching on the kitchen floor. The curator of the Albertina said to me, actually, probably very shortly afterwards, it was in the pot for lunch. But it almost quivers. You can almost feel the whiskers quivering. Dürer was using a single hair brush to paint the hair on the hair. And you can see here, it's unbelievable. This is life size. This is only on this bit. It's only about that. It's almost, it again, it feels to me quite Japanese-like in that sort of sense of detail, that sense of, it's almost like a netsuke or something. And then the way that to highlight the whiskers, he puts a little white line, just gorgeous. And then almost blasphemously, because he starts to treat it as he would a portrait of an icon of a saint, he uses the same trick with the eye, painting the window in the eye, the window of the soul. It's almost as though he's giving personhood to an animal. I mean, this is a very common animal. He's almost deifying it. And there are aspects in which the hair represents the Virgin Mary. But this picture, again, goes beyond that to me. It goes beyond those things. And then the third image I saw at the Albertina was this bird. It's called a blue roller, an Indian blue roller. Quite an exotic, almost like a bird of paradise. And he's painted it in the most plaintive way. It's hanging from a hook on the wall. And that sort of parted beak, the sort of cry of it, the way the claw is tucked behind one wing. There's such a sense of drama to something which is just a nature study, really. There's such a sense of empathy, with what this creature is. It's got nothing to do with myth, or it's there for its own sake, and it's an extraordinarily beautiful.
Do you know if he was in Cambodia, Vietnam? I mean, they're everywhere.
Oh, are they? Right, yeah. No, but they do come to Europe. They do arrive in Europe. So. But
did Durer travel where they were?
No, Durer never left the Holy Roman Empire. Okay. But it was such a vast empire. But no, I mean, they blue rollers were turning up. They still do turn up in Spain and places. But just heartbreaking. As if this isn't enough, the next painting he does is to paint the beginning of time itself. Well, I think that's what it is. It's a comet, perhaps. I saw this new comet in the sky. Do you know there's a Comet 22? So I saw it this morning, a little strange little smudge in the sky. And I was thinking, oh my God, what Dürer did with the comet. But again, we don't really know why he painted it. There was a comet seen over Germany at that point, but there was also a meteorite which fell. Dürer probably didn't see any of those things. This becomes the Big Bang, really. There's something very end of time or beginning of time about it. And it's actually painted on the other side of an image of St. Jerome in the desert. And St. Jerome is in the desert with a lion at his feet, the lion from whose paw he has taken a thorn. So this lion becomes his companion. St. Jerome is beating his chest with a rock from the desert in penitence for his sins. And the exact point at which he's beating his heart is the exploding heart of the star. It's, this picture stands free on a kind of pedestal in the National Gallery, so you can see both sides of the panels. All I could do is to lift off the panel and just walk out with it. It's the one painting of Dürer's which I would love to own.
What's the medium?
It's oil paint. It's oil paint. It's so beautifully painted. It's just the smallness of it. It's heartbreaking. The next image that I want to show you is, I think, probably going to be familiar to you, many of you, which is Dürer's rhinoceros. This has so much to talk about, and I don't want to talk too much, but interestingly, what Liz has been raising is how did these things arrive in Europe? Well, this animal arrived in Europe, in Lisbon, as a gift to King Manuel of Portugal, from the Sultan of Cambrai in India. It's an Indian rhinoceros. It was shipped all the way to Lisbon and arrived on the dockside in Lisbon, where German agents, espionage agents for the German economy, actually, so they're not political agents, sent back to Dürer sketches and descriptions of this amazing animal that arrived on the quayside. And Dürer created this image without ever having seen a rhinoceros. Never seen a rhinoceros. And such is the power and potency of his vision. That's how we saw the rhinoceros for 400 years. It's only really until David Attenborough came along that you sort of started. Obviously people saw rhinoceroses in zoos, but it's an uber rhinoceros. It's a dino rhino. It's like the excitement with which Dürer draws this image. He actually painted it first and then made the engraving afterwards. Is the fact that the butt of the animal is right up to the frame there, and the tusk of it is like filling the whole space with it, and it's like a armadillo. It clanks, and it's as though it's been stricken by asteroids and plated and armored. And for good measure, Dürer's even stuck an extra tusk in the back of the rhino's neck, and any whalehead will be able to diagnose where that tusk comes from. It comes from. It's the magical, freighted, powerful tusk of the narwhal, the sea unicorn. So valuable at this point in time that Queen Elizabeth I of England was given a narwhal tusk by her Arctic explorer Martin Frobisher. She could have bought a new castle with what this represented in monetary wealth. So this rhinoceros is perhaps his greatest hit in many ways, because he could print it. So you could own the rhinoceros, like an Athena poster on your teenage wall. It was the absolute sense of art for the masses, And the other aspect of this and of Dürer's prints is that they are immortal. Well, they outlive the artist himself, because they've got the woodblock. They can continue printing this after Dürer dies. So editions of this are still being issued after Dürer dies. So the power of the animal, he has realized, really extraordinarily, that animals are as powerful as human beings. He paints the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, but he can sell this 1,000 times. He can only paint one portrait, but he can sell this 1,000 many times. So his art has become global. He is the first global artist in many ways, and his work is moving across continents. So we come back to the story of the whale. Dürer's done the rhinoceros. He goes to Zeeland and he hears about a stranded whale on the coast of Zeeland. It's a mile long. The villagers are dying because of the miasma from this whale's fetid breath, its rotting corpse. And he's there with his friends, his drinking and gambling buddies. They charter a boat to go to Zeeland to find this whale. And what's in Dürer's mind. It's his Ahabian Moby Dick moment. He's going to get the whale. It's already dead. He doesn't have to kill it. He's going to bring it back to life. He's going to make a print of it. And it's going to be literally his biggest seller ever. And of course, he's got a lot to live up to, because people think about sea monsters as really strange animals at this point, really deeply strange animals. Now, this is an image being made at the same time as Dürer is making his art. That's a real example of how modern Dürer is in the way he looks at the natural world. And Dürer is no way going to create a whale like that. He knows what he's going. He knows these are real animals. He knows that this is his great chance. He has tried drawing whales before, but only in a very sort of classical way, the way almost the Greeks portray dolphins, curly-tailed, symbolic animals. So he charters his boat to Zeeland. A great storm breaks out. The ship is smashed into the quayside of Middelburg. Most of the people get off the boat. Dürer is then washed back out to sea. Only 5 people left on the boat, and his friends are on land watching him about to die. The greatest artist of the Northern Renaissance. He is really famous at this point because of how widely appreciated his art is. And they're just about to see him drown. But Dürer, in a kind of scene from Shakespeare's Tempest, sort of takes control of the whole situation, tells the sailors where to pull the rigging in and all sorts of extraordinary things in a very Melvillian way. And he comes back into land and they go to find that the whale has been washed away by the same storm.
Oh.
So this sense of like let down, the sense of almost hubris, his ambition, his arrogance to draw the biggest animal in the world has been defeated by his own ambition in a way. But from that moment on, he doesn't feel very well. And he gets more and more unwell. And quite soon, it's clear he's got malaria, which he contracted from the swamps of Zeeland. So it's a very emblematic sense of his mortality. He actually dies 8 years later, and he always blames it on the whale. He blames his illness on the whale. He dies in 1528, and but the amazing thing is that such is the power, the graphic power of his engravings, that a whole new generation are making art in the same way, in the exact same way. And in Zeeland, in exactly the place where Dürer tried to find this whale, an artist called Jan Reindem draws a whale in exactly the way, I believe, that Dürer would have drawn a whale. I think that's what Dürer would have done. And it's very ironic that Herman Melville in Moby Dick says that no one before the year of 1850, when he's writing Moby Dick, has ever created a realistic image, especially of the sperm whale, which is, of course, the whale which is being hunted everywhere, especially from New England, but was being hunted. It's particularly being hunted here at this point, but this is a stranded whale. And the amazing thing is that Herman Melville's saying that, but he's actually half Dutch. His mother was a Gansvoort. And in fact, the Dutch engravers, learning from Dürer, directly from Dürer, were creating the first realistic images of whales. And if you compare that to that other image just I showed you, those grotesque sort of stuff, it's astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing. And I sort of wonder, in a sort of weird counter-factual world, if Dürer has succeeded in creating an image of the whale in the way that he did of the rhinoceros, that maybe we would have looked at whales in a different way. Because whales were seen as such strange, demonic, almost evil creatures. Even up into the Second World War, Walt Disney made a propaganda film for the Allied war effort, which was trying to get America into the Second World War by showing a cartoon of Europe turning into a sperm whale with a swastika on it, swallowing plucky Britain. And so this Walt Disney cartoon. You would never use a whale in that way now. The whale has become an entirely different, iconic creature in our culture. So I wonder if Dürer had succeeded, maybe we wouldn't have been doing what we did to whales and what we still do in many ways. And I thought when I was looking at that picture this morning of this image from Provincetown, it's about 1965. Some people might tell me what the right date is. Stormy, do you remember that? Was that? Do you remember that one coming up?
It came up in front of our house.
Was it?
And then it went back to sea, broke the rope, and came onto this, died here.
Amazing. So is your place, is this the front of your place? Or
No, this is
closer to Yeah.
Beach goers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's beach
Yeah.
goers.
But this kind of modern image of a Dürer scene. And it also made me think of a wonderful poem by this poet, Marianne Moore, who in 1928 walked into the Met Museum in New York and saw, the same way as I saw for the first time Dürer's images in the Boston Museum of Fine Art, she saw an exhibition staged in 1928 to commemorate Dürer's death in 1528. And she fell in love with Dürer. She almost became engaged to him in her mind. His work features in at least a dozen of her poems, but most beautifully and most tellingly and most almost metaphysically in a very strange way, in which she imagines Dürer coming to a New England whaling town. And she writes this poem, published in 1932, in her apartment in Brooklyn. Part of a novel, part of a poem, part of a play. The Steeplejack. Dürer would have seen a reason for living in a town like this, with 8 stranded whales to look at, with the sweet sea air coming into your house on a fine day, when water etched with waves as formal as the scales on a fish. Poem goes on, but it's suddenly Dürer is living on in a poet, a modernist poet, a great modernist poet, celebrated by Eliot and Pound, Marianne Moore's a wonderful poet. His art is living on there in this great, sort of almost cinematic way that she evokes the whale. And it also evokes for me Dürer's most famous engraving, which is not particularly animalistic, but is very cryptic, very enigmatic. This ungendered angel under a moonbow, so not a rainbow, but a moonbow, and another comet in the sky, and a strange bat-like, sperm-like creature holding the title of this image, Melancholia 1. So it's almost like a progressive rock album from the 1970s. And all these strange things surrounding this sort of strange dodecahedron shape with a face coming out of it, a ladder going nowhere, like a stairway to heaven, a strange pack of numbers which seem to add up all the lines out to number 34, which is a magic number, a sleeping dog, a stone ball, an enema, and this angel themselves, which is ungendered. I don't believe that they're either male or female, with the folded wings. And lots of people have said that this is the melancholia, is this saddened angel. But if you look into that angel's eyes and you look at the angel's face, they are smiling. They are smiling because it's the artistic state of melancholia, of contemplation, of meditation, of the whole world. Like Dürer is bringing the whole world into this frame now, into this image. And this image, which I would say is probably one of the most cryptic images in modern Western art, still has a power now that's really affecting people now. It's also cinematic. It's surreal. The way it's lit. And it's tiny again. It's only 10 by 8. It's tiny. I went to see it, I saw it first when it was printed first in a gallery in Milan, and I was standing in front of it, and when the gallery attendant came past, I grabbed her by the arm. I said, "Look, it's amazing, isn't it?" She said, this is the great day to press the red button, summon security and get it thrown out. But it just gets you like that. There's something about Dürer. It's so dumph. The time between ourselves and Dürer doesn't exist when you're standing in front of his work of art like that. And I also thought when I was writing the book, this photograph, this happened when I was writing the book. I was in Provincetown at this time in 2016, January 2016, was a mass stranding of sperm whales around Europe, Northern Europe, in France, Germany, England, but in Netherlands especially. And an intern who was working at the centre some years ago, Jeroen Hoekendijk, was working with Duke and Scott, was now living on the island of Texel in the Netherlands, where this 5 sperm whales stranded. This is a photograph of them at dawn. Unfortunately, they're still alive at this point. But it becomes a modern melancholia, and it becomes an evocation of Dürer and his belief in astrology and astronomy, the sort of rainbow in the background. But even more than that, this mass stranding of 2016 has been quite convincingly linked to solar storms, which were deceiving the electromagnetic lines which these whales follow. That's their natural GPS. They were deceived by solar storms into stranding in the shallow waters of the North Sea and of Zeeland. So this whole sense of Dürer believing his fate was determined by the stars, well, their fate was determined by the stars. I'm coming towards the end with the last few images just to look at when Dürer didn't paint the whale. He painted instead a walrus because it was the next best thing. And his caption, it's a fantastic image. His caption says this sleepy-looking animal was stranded on the Zeeland, on the Netherlandish shores in 1521. Well, that's all very convincing, and the image is very convincing and really extraordinary. But did it happen? And I was very dubious, but I started to research the history of the image, and it pops up in really strange ways around the same time in a contemporary animal encyclopedia at the time, kind of guessing as Historia Animalium, which is in the New Bedford Whaling Museum, which is I took this picture. And it's sort of clearly Dürer's a walrus, but it's got like sort of foliate fins and a fish's tail and dog's legs, completely bizarre. And then in Amsterdam, I found the original watercolor where that came from. Really strange. Like it's being hoiked out of the canal and lying there in a puddle. Very strange animal because the head is realistic. So whoever saw it only saw the head. So it's very mysterious. What was really interesting about this collection of images, from which those engravings to the Gessner book were made, is that contained this image of a really recognizable killer whale, an orca. I mean, there's not much about that. I mean, it's slightly weird down here, but it's pretty recognizable, an orca, you know. So it just shows you how these things, the two things sit side by side, the fantastic horned spouting beasts, and then quite realistic cetaceans. And the other strange thing that happened when I was writing about the walrus is that Jeroen emailed me from Texel, the island of Texel, which is very close to where Dürer was trying to find the whale, because this had arrived. Incredible. So it's almost like I was reliving Dürer, you know. And this walrus it's completely surreal, in a sort of weird part of almost like a park or a garden. It's not far from the sea, but a very strange image. It reminds me of those dioramas in the Natural History Museum in New York, you know. Something again really sort of emblematic and odd about it, and very touching. And actually, you know, since then there's been last month in England, in Southampton where I live, a walrus arrived on the south coast of England. So they are obviously victims of the climate crisis. And a lot of things, when I was looking at the images of the rhinos and other animals that Dürer's painting, which are now immaculately preserved in museums, I was thinking that the animals they represent, they might outlast the animals they represent, those images. It's really extraordinary notion and again, passage of time, what's happened. And in many ways, you know, Dürer saw the beginning of the modern world, which saw the destruction of the modern world in many ways, the beginning of the Anthropocene, you know, the first stirrings of industrial exploitation of the natural world. So I'm sort of coming to the end. It's just because this is Provincetown, I wanted to show you Dürer's picture of a dog, and he loves dogs. there are often dogs in his paint engravings, especially. You see a little dog in the corner, and this dog again has really soulful eyes, very beautiful. I mean, there's someone who's drawing a real dog with empathy. And just to end with this, coming full circle to those enigmatic eyes. In the year 1900, someone walked into the Alt Pinakothek in Munich, which is where this portrait is held. He walked up to the portrait and scratched its eyes out.
Wow.
And you can still see, this is a modern image, they couldn't quite retouch them out.
Wow.
It's almost as though they couldn't bear the power of that gaze. And it's also indicative to me in something I explore in the book, but I won't go into much here, but the way that Dürer is used by the German fascists as an emblem of German purity, completely ignoring the fact that he was the son of a Hungarian Jew. And what they tried to do to Dürer, which I find pretty obscene, but those eyes, when you're in the gallery, you can't turn your back on them. It's really, really disconcerting. They like pierce you. But as I looked over my shoulder, I was sure he was doing that behind my head. Thank you very much. That's the end of this.